In the last video, we talked about what communication is. And so now that we have a grasp of what it actually is, let's talk about what communication actually entails. And so in this video, I'm going to cover 3 communication models as well as the components of communication. The first communication model we're going to talk about is called the transmission model or the linear model. Okay, so if you'll take a look back at my beautiful artwork back here, what this model says is that party A sends a message to party B, and party B receives that message. So it's one-way communication. This is not typically how we think about face-to-face interactions. However, this does still have some relevance in society today, right? If you think about when we're watching TV, right? Somebody puts something on TV, they send out that message via the TV, and then we receive that message. We don't actually communicate back to the TV, or maybe we do in some crazy sporting events, right? But the TV doesn't actually receive that message back, right? So it's one-way communication, right? Radio, very similar, generally one-way communication. So that's the transmission model. Okay, the interactional model is not one-way communication. What the interactional model says is party A sends a message to party B, and then party B receives the message and sends one back. Right? And so there's sort of this lag between messages, right? So this is not how a typical conversation actually goes in terms of our nonverbal communication. Now, verbally, this is the flow of communication, usually, right? In a face-to-face interaction. I send a message to you, you receive it, you then talk, right? Sending a message back, right? But nonverbal communication is constant, right? So even the way we carry ourselves, our body language, how close or far away we stand from each other, that's constantly sending messages to the other party, right? So is the interactional model relevant in face-to-face interactions? No. It's actually relevant anywhere there is a lag in communication. And what's a lag? Well, for those of you that have played video games, you probably know what a lag is, right? It's the time between the message being sent and the message received, right? So if I'm playing a video game online, right, and I'm playing against somebody who doesn't have a lag, right, that means that they're seeing what's happening on the screen before I am if I actually have a lag, right? The time it takes from the game to communicate the message, right, to my actual console, to the TV, and then me to actually take it in, right? So does it take time to send messages and then receive them, right? Is there time in between those things, right? So the interactional model actually applies in a lot of written communication, right? So if I'm texting, right, think about the flow of communication there. A message is typed up, it's hit send, it takes a second to transfer over to someone else's phone, their phone vibrates, they open it, right, open their phone, read the message, craft a message back, send it back, right? There's some sort of lag. So the last model is actually called the transactional model. And the transactional model is a model that we use for face-to-face interactions. And it looks very similar to the interactional model with one key difference. It's no longer first and second. Instead, it is first and first. What does that mean? How is that actually possible? Well, again, it's encapsulating nonverbal communication, right? So even as we're having a face-to-face interaction, right, and we're taking turns talking, we are constantly communicating non-verbally, right? And so for face-to-face interactions, this is the model that we use, the transactional model. So those are the 3 models. Let's talk about communication components, right? We're going to talk about 7 communication components, or really kind of 7.5, okay? So the first component we have is a sender, right? What did we say in the model, right? The sender, right? What's that? The person who puts out the information. They send what? They send a message. That's the second component, okay? They send that through what we call a channel. A channel is the medium. It's how we are actually communicating. So the channel, right now would be through your actual computer, this video, right? If we're communicating face to face, right? The channels would be verbal and nonverbal communication. If we're texting, that's the channel, right? It's just the medium. So the sender sends a message through the channel to the receiver, right? That's the fourth component. The receiver, it's the person who actually takes in the information. Okay? Then we have something called noise or interference. I actually like the term interference better than noise, and I'll explain why in a second. But interference is anything that distracts or takes away from the message, right? Now, this could be a variety of different things, right? This could actually be physical sound, right? Maybe somebody's talking in the background, right? And so it's hard for me to kind of focus on the message being sent here, right? And that's kind of what the word noise implies. It's that physical sound, right? But interference isn't just physical sound, right? It's actually broader than that, right? It could be actual physical interference where maybe we're talking, but there's something in between you and me and we can't quite see each other clearly, right? Maybe it's visual interference. Maybe there's nothing in between us, but there's something happening behind me that's really interesting, and now it's difficult for you to actually focus on what I'm saying. We could have psychological interference. In fact, we often do, right? Have you ever tried listening to somebody talk that you dislike? Is it easy to take in their message, right? No, not usually. It's difficult to listen to them. Immediately, we usually start criticizing that person. Right? Have you ever been in class, right, and gotten bored, and now it's difficult to pay attention, right? That would be psychological interference. Or maybe you've had a really, really rough day, right, and you just want to shut your brain off, right, but you're trying to force yourself to listen, and now it's more difficult, right? That'd be psychological interference as well, right? So interference is a little broader than just physical noise. All right, next we have the environment. The environment is just where the interaction is taking place. And now, technically, right, the environment is broader than the physical surroundings, right, of the interaction. But for the sake of this being a 100 level class, we'll say it's the physical environment around us and not necessarily the mental environment and all those other concepts. Okay, the next component is called context. Okay, what is context? Well, the definition of context is the circumstances that form the setting for an event. Let's make that a little bit simpler. In order to answer what is the context of an interaction, ask why is the interaction taking place and why is it taking place why is it happening the way that it's happening? So why is the interaction happening and why is the interaction happening the way that it's happening? Right? So why is this interaction happening? Why are you watching this video? Right? Well, the reason is you're taking a Kirkwood class called Fundamentals of Oral Communication. That's why this interaction is happening, as well as why the video is structured the way that it is, right? There's the context, okay? And then the last component we're going to kind of touch on is called feedback. Feedback gets a little silly. Feedback is any reaction to the message. We typically think about feedback as something that is going to change future messages, right? So if you think about when I am teaching, right? If a student is looking confused, am I going to continue on with the lecture in the exact same way? Well, no, I'm going to adjust my delivery of the message, right? So we think of feedback a lot of times as nonverbal communication. And technically, couldn't you just say, well, isn't that just another message being sent? Well, yes. So this component could fall under, right, the component of message, or maybe even the component of channel, right, the medium, right? But we kind of make it its own component as well. Okay? So that's a brief overview of both the communication models and the communication components.